in our country, the way it works right now, they don't violate like free speech. It's not like you're yelling fire in a building. You're not. I
Let's be
understand
clear.
the concern.
Sam thinks you should be able to scream that Sandy Hook was fake.
Yeah, I do, and I'll die on that hill. And I'm going to tweet about it later.
And that's where we disagree.
Yeah. It's the root cause.
He's willing to die on the same hill as so many crisis actors of years past.
Oh my God. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Growing Up Christian. I'm Sam.
I'm Casey.
I'm Jeremiah.
And it's just us today. We don't have a guest for you. Casey and Jeremiah and I are going to see if we can get ourselves canceled today. We'll see. This might be the last episode of the podcast. But before we get into why and what what we want to talk about and the direction we want to take this, I do want to. I thought of a story from. I mentioned last week that I was at that Newfound Glory show, and there was a moment I wanted to mention from it, and I'm going to tie it into this like a cheesy shit-ass youth pastor. I'll do it. I think I can do it. But yeah, so at the show, there's always people who are dressed like characters, right? Not actual characters, just people just hamming it up. You're at a show, people want to ham it up. And there's this
like
guy.
The kid in the suit, the like token kid in a suit at the back of the show.
Yeah, there's one dude in like a tracksuit with a thick ass like gold chain. It was kind of fake, but he looked kind of pimping. And I don't know. There's a couple of guys dressed like that. They clearly came as like a squad together, and slicked back hair, unzipped track jacket with like a wife beater underneath it with a thick gold chain. And they were very like not just like the track suits were like very patterned. But there was this guy he was so funny. Everyone noticed him. You couldn't have not noticed him. He had jean overalls on with no shirt, real big guy, no shirt. And they were low enough where you could see like his tighty whities, his stomach kind of hanging over his tighty whities with the band flipped over, and it's all low. He's got like a straw hat on, and
he might be my senator.
Yeah. So I've seen this guy around. He seems like a fun, like loving dude. And I don't know. It's a pop punk show, right? So a lot of people are just happy and having a good time. A lot of posy vibes. And the bathroom lines, it's an outdoor show, so it's just porta potties. And there's a long line. Like lines got pretty long, a lot of them. But I'm standing behind this kid, and he says like a couple of things to me. He'd been drinking. I can always tell, like, I always feel like if someone talks to me out of like unexpectedly, they must be drinking, because I would never talk to a stranger unless I was. Maybe he was just a friendly guy. But we're standing there waiting to get like into the bathrooms, and everyone's been in line for a good few minutes, and that guy with overalls just goes and walks right up to the front, starts his own line, because there's probably like 6 lines, right? And each line is kind of like blocked off to take 3 or 4 stalls. And this guy just goes, whoop, walks right up, stands in the very front, puts his hands on his hips. And the guy in front of me just turns around and looks at me. And we make eye contact for probably 3 seconds, and then just like double over laughing. Like, because this guy doesn't give a shit. He's just like, if I was like, obviously, if you're going to wear this to a show, you don't give a shit about lines. You don't care about anything. You're going to do what you want. And no one's going to stop you. Like, who's going to say anything? So we're just laughing about that. And we started talking about like just strangers having moments. Like, it was just, I don't know this guy from anyone, but we just connected over something silly and funny. And I feel like something neat happens between 2 humans that share a silly moment like that don't know each other. But what made it even funnier was he goes into one of the stalls, who knows which one, but the guy in front of me, it was now his turn to get a stall next. And I think he knew the girl in the line next to him. She's like, dude, one of those is open. Like, because you know how in a porta potty, it's like they have like the occupied or not, like, or vacant for the, like, on the locks if you close them. So she keeps yelling at him. She's like, that one says vacant. What are you doing? And so he goes over to open it, and he just swings the door open, and it's that guy who cut the line just taking a piss. And he turns around. He turns his head over his shoulder and does this wink and like side smile, like with a big head nod, and looks at everyone who's standing in line with just like big wink and a smile. And so we're all just laughing about that. And the guy comes out of the bathroom. He's just like, did you guys see? Everybody saw that? Everyone saw it. He just tried to see my dick. That guy was trying to look at my dick. And he's like, just pretending like making a scene. And that was it. It was funny. And now I'm going to tie this into, this is my shitty youth pastor attempt. I didn't really intend to tie this in at all, but either way, I don't know what you're standing in line with a bunch of complete strangers, and you feel like you kind of connected with them over something funny, had a little bit of conversation after the fact, and then you went about your day. And I don't know what those people thought about anything, about the deeper questions of the universe, whether or not they voted for Trump or Biden or didn't vote at all. So I think that is neat, in that you can actually connect with people regardless of what they think about anything. And you don't have to know what they think about anything to be able to have a moment with somebody you know or don't know. So for everybody listening, one of the things, what we are kind of interested in talking about that I don't feel like we've gotten into a lot. Casey, I mean, you and I have shared our opinions about plenty of things, but starting a podcast and trying to be transparent about who you are and what you think, especially when you're somewhat intentionally, maybe somewhat unintentionally grouping yourself into the whole quote unquote deconstruction world, it gets tough to feel like you might always be able to be authentic. And we don't have any problem pushing back against the right or the conservative side of things, because we lived in that world for so long and we've found that it was insufficient for us. And it's easy to just dog on it, make fun of it. It's grafted into our upbringing so much that it's as simple as making fun of any aspect of your childhood, joking on your parents for something silly, that whatever. But I feel like as we do this, things have the potential to snowball. And the deconstruction world is very much, I want to say liberal, I want to maybe say progressive, but I don't think that, I think liberal might maybe be more
left leaning.
Yeah. Cause like there's obviously a lot of different ways to be left or liberal. But Casey, again, we've talked about seeing a lot of the same trappings on the left as the right. If you say the wrong thing, you don't toe the line, you're an imposter, you're a fake, you're a fraud. And I feel like things are kind of getting away from everyone. It feels like a runaway train in some ways. And I think that's just what I want to talk about. There's a few things particularly that we can get into about it, but I want to spend some time this episode going over, some of our intentions for starting the podcast, the difficulty of maintaining a posture of transparency. I want to be, but without dragging other people into it, right? I don't really have a right to throw a lot of people's business out. And I've had a lot of shit go on in my life. You guys know what's going on, but there's a lot that I don't feel like I can talk about here as I need to. It just wouldn't be necessarily appropriate, but probably if anyone wants to join the Discord, you might get a little bit more of what's those kinds of things in the Discord. But there's just, anyway, there's a lot going on in our society, whether it's movies, comedy, politics, left-leaning deconstruction, Twitter. There's just a lot of spaces in our world right now that feel like we're having to have, but everyone needs to have conversations about how we're navigating it, or you don't need to plant your flag in and choose a side or anything like that. But I do think that I'm afraid of being ambiguous and trying to fit into a space out of fear of, someone just having a problem with your take or something like that. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys to follow up on the fucking 10 minutes of monologuing that I just did. God damn.
Yeah, we have gone back and forth quite a bit about this. And I've thought about it a lot, like over time. I've thought a lot about, okay, have I misrepresented anything that
Yeah.
I actually think or
Yep.
believe, or have I misrepresented my commitment to this or that, or my certainty on this issue? And I don't know. I it's funny. Like, I had a guy reach out. He wanted us to do like a joint podcast with him. He had his own kind of deconstruction podcast, and Sam like couldn't do it, so I did it by myself. And we started talking a little bit about that kind of stuff because he asked me some pretty direct questions about my political leanings and ideological leanings and stuff. And you can't hear it because apparently he never put it out, which I I just discovered this week. I went looking back. I'm like, I never heard anything about this ever again. It never came out. Okay, that's cool.
That's the second time that's happened.
But I yeah, it is. That's how you know it went bad.
Yeah, for them. I thought the other one was that what the heck was the name of it?
It was called Speculate with Us.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about guns and gun rights and shit like that. And I don't think that it went the way they expected it to.
No. But he had asked me something about that, and I said, I think one of the things, like one of the like long lasting impacts of growing up the way that we did, and like the Bible is the inerrant word of God, and it's this, and this, and you have to believe it this way, literally, or else, what rock do you have to stand on and stuff. And, sorting that all out as I got older left me with a real distaste for ideology.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the ideological spiral that all movements seem to fall into eventually, where, no matter what role they have in a particular event or in a policy or something like that, if it goes poorly, there's never a moment of like, well, yeah, I guess maybe we were wrong, or maybe we misjudged this or that. It's so easy to be like, well, we really didn't implement it in a pure enough way. I mean, if we had a pure enough representation of the doctrine, of the ideology that we all know is true, then it would have gone perfect. And you see this especially, like the right is like such a perfect example of that. Libertarianism, especially, like some piece of legislation gets repealed and they're very excited, and then when there's bad effects, they're like, well, it just there's all these other regulations that interfered with the end result. That stuff drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And so like I have a hard time. I really don't want to be subscribed to a given standpoint that supposedly explains everything.
Yeah. I think another aspect of wanting, it's weird because people talk in private probably differently than they do in public in some way. And it's not like a misrepresentation of yourself or that you're a total scumbag in private, but when you don't have to qualify what you say or your jokes or anything like that, it helps. When it feels like at times we may go out of our way to qualify something for the public in order to make sure that, they understand you. I think that can go too far and you spend way too much time qualifying statements that probably don't necessarily need to be. But something that I'm kind of dealing with is how to represent myself publicly as someone who's back in school to become a counselor, right? There's certain ways that I feel like, I don't know, I don't want things to come back to get me. I guess is my fear that if
Understandable.
you make those jokes or representing yourself wrong and it's recorded, like your apology later on for your misrepresentation isn't gonna maybe hold a lot of weight if a student finds it or something like that.
You want to be able to make a dumb joke or just like have a hot take without that being a reflection of who you are as a person when you're trying to do your very serious job of helping someone get their life sorted out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to battle because I like making jokes about that may be in poor taste sometimes, or that a lot of this is like fine, like grown-ups, any grown-up or teenager can listen to this, but it changes the dynamic if somebody you're counseling knows it, right? Like for example, I'll harp on conservative evangelicalism, fundamental evangelicalism all day. I know it well. I come from it. It's like making fun of someone in your family, like it. Because I think there are times where if other people say awful things about them, like, well, I know some good people who are like that, and then it might hit you the wrong way depending on who says it and how, and the level of vitriol. But I could say the same thing, and just to
But
the
you
right.
think you believe you're doing it from a position of like there is still some love there or some respect or like I actually understand the good sides of it. So when I bring a critique, it means something versus you're just trying to tear them down. So you're an idiot.
Yeah,
You don't
and
know what you're
it's
talking
also
about.
probably a little bit of self-defense and
Yeah.
getting on my high horse. I'm not trying to absolve myself from any sort of
Well,
arrogance, but I think what is difficult is if I'm going to having kind of built a small platform where what we do is address these things. I mean, the last thing on earth I need is for someone who is involved in that world, who was born into it and is also in high school. Because I think I've mentioned it. School adjustment counseling is my direction. So if I have a student like myself when I was 15 years old, the last thing on earth you really need them knowing about is maybe your feelings about conservative evangelicalism. That's going to put you in a weird spot with someone.
put them on the defensive and you're an enemy,
Yeah. So
I think maybe we should clarify too, with the way that we're setting this whole thing up. This isn't intended to be like some tired, boring, played out cancel culture rant. Like, go cancel culture. Blah, blah, blah. It's more. It's not about. I don't want to be punished for saying what I think. It's more about like I don't want to misrepresent. I don't want to let outside pressures make me misrepresent what I think,
yes.
or say, ascribe something that I don't believe or that I do believe and not to the right extent or whatever, only to have it come back and disappoint people because you weren't honest about who you were. And part of the reason that this has come up and we've talked a lot about it is because, we've talked to a lot of people so far in this pod, and this is a young show, but we've talked to a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And, it's funny how many people, like, we do the episode, everything's good, there's always a little bit of a, an intro period where you're feeling each other out, and your guard starts to come down when you start to realize like what kind of person it is and stuff. And it's been interesting to hear how many people, like, once we turn off the recording and we're just settling down and just talking back and forth between people, how many people that like you would by all accounts think that they are like right in line with like this, left-leaning evangelical point of view that's pretty, well articulated on Twitter and stuff like that. How many of them kind of express that they're not completely down with all of that? And it's funny, it strikes you as weird, but it really shouldn't. Because, I mean, who is going around ascribing like all of the values of a single movement? You don't have a
rings of statement of faith that that shit you have
it really does. Yeah, it's almost like doctrine. It's a statement that maybe you don't sign, but by being a part of that conversation, like, it's kind of assumed that you agree to all of it.
Yeah. Another thing is that makes me like, if I end up being wrong, first of all, people don't change their minds overnight. We didn't, right? Like, if I end up being wrong about something, I hope I am still self-aware enough where I can admit that at some point. And I think that I'm okay being wrong. I truly think that I'm okay being wrong on a lot of things. I don't think I hold my ideologies too tight. I don't really express them too specifically. I don't know. I think learning new information and changing your mind has become something that I've become accustomed to. And after admitting you've been wrong about so many things, the last thing on earth I want to do is double down on where I'm at now. And I don't think that's helpful. And I think that's
right.
I think that's what I see in a lot of like ex-evangelical Twitter. And I think that's where some of this is coming from, is the internet ex-evangelical spaces
is an echo chamber of a different, like, social media is designed to create echo chambers
Yeah.
in an amoral algorithmic way. It's nothing, there's no giant design for this. It's just the way they are designed, they will reward echo chambers of a certain type, and then they'll reward when those echo chambers clash with others. But while you guys were talking about it, what I've been thinking is like, is it a somewhat recent thing that people had to have stances on something? There was a thing that you talked about, not that you couldn't have like opinions about specific facets of a situation, but letting people know what your stance is on this overarching issue. Like, unless you were a writer who jotted all that stuff down like 40 years ago, where would you express that? Like, you could get into long conversations with friends or maybe, I guess, people in public, but like, unless you're part of a debate club or you write opinion pieces for the local paper or whatever, what venue are you going to be in where your stance on this whole issue matters or anyone cares to hear it?
Yeah, which is what you do in a bio, essentially. You sum up your political or religious ideologies in like 15 words. Liberal, BLM, anti, whatever this.
Well, what I was thinking about while you guys were talking was like, I don't know what my stance is on guns. I own a lot. Of course, I grew up, pretty conservative. I own some of the guns that are supposed to be pretty scary that a lot of people that I agree with on a lot of things think I'm not supposed to be able to own, or I shouldn't own, or that, they're horrible baby killers or whatever. And like, I know a lot of those people just don't know what they're talking about, but I don't know that I could actually sum up what am I talking about when it comes to guns, the overall issue of guns. Like,
seriously,
I own a bunch. I target shoot.
That's all I need to know. We'll see you next time, Jeremiah.
There's like a non-zero chance. In the back of my head somewhere, I have thought about like, well, if somebody was to break into my house, how would I use one of my guns to defend me? I have a shotgun under my bed. It's really nice not having kids sometimes because you can just leave, just lay a shotgun on the ground. But like at the same time, I know I hate the NRA. Like, I think that's a horrible organization. I strongly dislike and disagree with most aspects of modern popular gun culture, not because anything about the guns themselves, because it has co-opted so many other like quasi-racist, nationalist, other viewpoints, anti-immigration, anti-liberal, like a whole bunch of other stuff. And I feel like I can't participate in that conversation because that's so many things that I disagree with. But at the same time, I don't feel like the solution to everything is like, well, obviously guns are completely fine, amoral things that no one should ever have any concerns about, no matter what. Like, I've got questions. I've got concerns. I don't know 100% how I feel about some of this stuff. And I don't know how to sum any of that up in a way that I could communicate to someone in a tweet or a series of tweets.
Yeah.
And I think it's in my best interest to like, if you have a specific question about a specific thing, I feel like I can talk about that, but I don't know what my stance is. And I don't know what my stance is on a whole lot of things. And I'm, like you said, you're trying to leave yourself open to, well, whatever it is now, it's probably not going to be the same as it is in 5 or 10 years. And I need to leave myself open to my thinking on this may evolve as I hopefully learn more and get smarter about something or more educated on it. But, I don't know how to sum all that up, but why should I have to?
Yeah.
Why does anyone care?
It doesn't need to be quip. You don't need all of your beliefs or, you don't need, like, again, so I like your point, do you have to have a stance on everything? Can you just not know where you stand and be open to information as it comes your way? I think that's acceptable. I think that doesn't fit into the, the box system that people have. Okay, this fits here, you fit there. Now I can, sort these out and decide what I need, because it's just an easy way to sort and organize. Like, that's what our brains are trying to do. You're grouping things together. You're trying to make sense of your world. And I think that I think that there isn't, I think what's also interesting is if you're coming to these spaces with an open mind, or if you don't have a completely parsed out stance, as you're saying, you might not have, even on something as polarizing as the gun issue, is like, there's not a lot of spaces you can enter into online, maybe even in person, where you can have those conversations, and that those are ultimately have been almost like wiped out. The discourse, we've been forced into echo chambers. I think it ties in a little bit. I might be wrong, but I think it ties in a little bit with this normal. This is probably the poorest, and these are the caveats, right? This is the qualifying.
Yeah, don't make any caveats, Sam. Just tell us what you think. No, just tell us what you think. We're gonna think you're dumb anyway. It's fine. Just say it.
It's now I lost my train of thought. So that's
Sorry.
not super helpful. No, because again, going back to these issues of wanting to qualify things to not be misunderstood. But I think living in a time where we've conflated anxiety or needing to set up boundaries with feeling uncomfortable by conversation or in a certain setting, we've done ourselves a disservice by eliminating conversations with people we don't agree with and having. I'm not saying that's always gone well. You look at the founding fathers fucking killing each other in a duel over some dumb shit. Like, we know that. I'm not trying to like make it sound like things used to be great or we did this better at some point. I think the internet has ultimately made things worse, but I don't think that means there wasn't a time or there aren't spaces throughout history where we've been able to do this. And
I think that the fact that everyone calls it the internet, like that's where people ascribe the issue to, means that it still does work in a lot of actual society, because you can go out in public and be around all kinds of people. Like you said, at the concert, your politics weren't relevant to the concert or weren't relevant to that thing going on. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you wouldn't still be mad. Like if somebody next to you said something like really racist or out of line, like you wouldn't jump on them and be like, yeah, that's not cool. And probably a lot of other people around you would too. It just means that you can have a human experience with these people and it doesn't really matter what box they fit into. As long as they're treating you with respect and you're treating them with respect, people are able to put aside, like they know that that there's differences with these people, but that's okay because fundamentally they're still people treating each other with kindness and you're a person treating them with kindness. And for this particular interaction, that's all that's required. Like, that's fine. It doesn't matter what they think about all this other stuff.
I think that's a huge point, and one that gets lost in the shuffle a lot of times, especially when you're around the same type of people a large majority of the time. And, I've talked about on here quite a bit about like the vast majority of people in my orbit on an everyday basis are very conservative. A lot of them are Christians, and a lot of them ascribe beliefs that would be a real problem for a lot of the people who, we connect with here, who I know through other channels, and like, I mean, just on the question of like gay rights and stuff, a lot of the people that I know have some viewpoints that I think are gross and I don't agree with. And I don't know exactly what to do with them on that. But what I do know too, though, is that I have no doubt that when those people come into contact with LGBTQ people in the real world, they're gonna treat them normally. Like, they're not going to take a stand by, calling out someone in a public place and stuff. And I mean, what's the most interaction that we have with most people? A cashier at a business, or a waiter or waitress at a restaurant. Obviously, there are people out there that suck, that do awful things and say awful things to people in those scenarios. But I don't know that there's very many people that I know personally that would do those types of things. And here's why that matters. And everything in these types of discussions, the part of the problem here is that everything is like categorized as good versus bad.
Yeah,
we're the good guys versus the bad guys, and we have to face down the Republicans or the liberals on this issue, and we got to beat them and stuff. And like, that's really useful for the people who are at the top of that order, and depending on votes and things like that. But the problem is that, like, I can say whatever you think would be best to those people that are in my life. If I spout off at them, or if I insult them, or if I like scream at them in some performative way to let them know where I stand, not in a way of like a compassionate, like corrective way of hey man, here's where I think you're not seeing this the same way as me or whatever. We're done. Like, we close that discussion off and that's it. And, for a lot of these people, the way that we can hope that they change is by having interaction with us on a daily basis or on a regular basis, like living next to you and seeing the way you live and the way you think and learning to trust you might eventually help shape their opinions on some of those things. But the vast majority of them are still going to go to the grave thinking some version, watered down or not, of what they think now. And that's what's the problem is with like this we have to stand up and defeat these people on this and that and the other. I mean, everyday life is not, it doesn't come down to a vote on November 2nd. And like these people, I mean, whatever it is, whatever stand you're taking with them, like they're still going to be there after November 2nd. They're still going to be your neighbors. They don't die if you vanquish them on the election day or whatever. And like you can't burn your relationships to the ground or grandstand to these people and expect to have some sort of long-term effect, because the next battle is just around the corner. I mean, this plays out over and over and over again. And I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of jumbled up here, but
well, can I try to clarify one thing you're saying? Because I think if this comes across like we're all sitting here being like, the solution is to be in the middle, I don't think that anyone here is making like a call for moderation's sake, because like there is actual evil in the world. We can all debate about what that is, but like there is actual evil. There's things you ought to stand up for, and generally trying to like ride the fence only serves the people who are abusively in power, and they're counting on your apathy to be like, well, let's everybody just try to meet in the middle somewhere between Nazis are good and Nazis are bad. Maybe Nazis are just okay some of the time, right? Like this isn't one of those type of things. Like, but if I can go back to what you're saying, like about, people who think bad things you think are gross about LGBTQ people, but they treat them well. Like, yeah, I would be willing to bet that if you push them a little bit in a friendly conversation where they think you're on their side, or at least open to their side, they probably don't ascribe to a lot of the worst political Twitter takes, commentator takes, or whatever about how like everybody who's gay is grooming your kid and they're all pedophiles and blah, blah, blah. Like that's one of the current hot conversations right now, right?
Yeah.
You have to be careful not to lump that person, in with that hateful ideology that someone else is saying, just because the person saying the hateful stuff and the person probably agree on a lot of other issues. Like it's very possible that person is like, I don't know about the whole gay thing, which is how a lot of them would say it, but like, I mean, I got some issues with it, but like this person I know, their son is gay and he's nice. I don't know. Like they don't really have a whole lot to actually compare to, but like you said, they treat people with overall kindness and respect, even if they disagree with them. So like you have to treat them based on who they are and what they actually stand up for. Now, if they're going all off on Facebook or like standing up at the family reunion to loudly shout down your gay cousin or something, yeah, all right, maybe you need
now we got a different situation.
Exactly, but that's not the type of person you're talking about. You're talking about like, are your parents gonna think the gays are wrong all the way to the grave? Maybe. Like you may not win that one, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna be hateful towards them in person, or that you can't find some common ground on the way people ought to be treated, regardless of whether or not you agree with them or whatever. Like there's a lot of common ground that can be had, that even if they never come over to your side, you can still help round them out as a person on that issue.
Yeah. And I think to even jump off on your Nazis example, because I think it actually is helpful, because what no one's trying to do, or I should say what people have now tried to, is look back on that and go, how did that happen? Like it's not like everyone who was like, there was a lot of justifications actually. And we have, it might be coming out next week after this comes out, our conversation with Brian McLaren, where I think he kind of talks about this a little bit. And it's like, no one's trying to make excuses for Nazis, but we're trying to understand how that happened now. And it doesn't make you a sympathizer or a middle grounder. You're like, look, we live in a world where that was able to happen with a place that considered itself 80% Christian, probably wouldn't have looked a lot different than maybe our culture or other cultures throughout history, but somehow all those people were able to be rallied into contributing to one of the worst genocides in human history, and then go home and eat dinner with their family and tuck their kids in and give them a kiss on the forehead and say goodnight. Like no one's trying to find a middle ground there, but it's not to your disadvantage to look at what happened, understand it, and try to figure out how to prevent something like that from happening again. And I'm not necessarily sure that ties in specifically to where you ended up, Jeremiah, where it's just like where you're like, oh, how does this person act in the world? But I think it does give you an idea of maybe which people are more likely to be pulled in one direction versus another. And I think your influence can matter. But I think what I want to talk about specifically is not, this could go either way. This could go a couple of different directions, but we'll start here. We'll say, what's the intent of your interactions with people, right? Are you trying to make converts? Are you trying to make copies of yourself? Are you trying to be evangelistic with your message? Whether you're on the left or the right, is that is the intent to pull people over to your side of the fence? Or, and I think even before, or I think the intent matters, right? Because if you're going to say something inflammatory, which we've all done, well, maybe me more than you guys, but if I've said something inflammatory on the internet, I knew I was doing it. You get to a point where you go, I don't fucking care anymore. Like, I'm so aggravated. I'm so angry. I want people to understand that that's my anger. I want people to know that this is how I feel. And you might feel that way in the moment, and you might not the next day. It could go.
But you're articulating something that's supposed to be a summation of how you feel. Like you're trying to share some information to convey a feeling because you want other people to understand how you feel. And so the people who agree with you might sympathize with the feeling, or the people who disagree with you might also like sympathize with the feeling in a different way. Like they understand the feeling. But I think what you said is pretty telling. A lot of what people do, especially on Twitter, is like hot takes after something happens.
Yeah.
It's sharing. They're trying to communicate how they feel about the situation, but because the whole platform revolves around engagement, you have to get people to engage in order for them to see your feeling. So you immediately have to like sign yourself up for a side and have a really spicy opinion on it. Or otherwise no one's going to engage. No one cares. And it's not like people care about the words that you're saying. They care that you are co-signing the feeling that they're having too. Like they're scared about the proliferation of guns and what that means for elementary school students, right? Like they're scared about domestic violence and that domestic abusers can buy guns. They may not understand all the specifics, but your spicy tweet, I don't think you had any spicy tweets about this, but your spicy tweet about like, we ought to take every AR-15 away and melt them down into desks for schools or whatever. Like they don't care about the specifics. Most likely they care that you're coming in saying, I'm worried about this too. I'm upset about this too. I'm scared about this too. And I'm mad. Yeah. And that's the only takeaway they have. I think that's why people get upset when tweets get dug up 10 years ago, from 10 years ago. And people are like, well, I was a long time ago, or blah, 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 blah. I think what actually makes people upset is they're like, that's just an off the cuff statement that can't be a summation of who this person is as a fully formed individual. And you're ready to rake them over the coals because of it. Now, sometimes that's absolutely deserved. Like sometimes one statement's all it takes to show how much of a scumbag somebody is. I'm not saying it's not, but like, I think most of us innately know that like you can't sum this whole person up in this super stupid 140 characters where they were probably just expressing how they felt, not necessarily conveying a super crucial bit of factual information. Yeah. They were probably just venting of like, oh man, a lot of people are moving into my neighborhood who don't look like me. I'm concerned about that. What does that mean for my children's future?
You lost me. No, you
just keep going back to yourself. It's frustrating.
No, I think the truth to, so I think people are trying to express their anger. I think they're trying to be validated. I think people want to be validated in that anger. But I think where I feel like I start to get lost, and I don't know, I think there's probably some good, reasonable pushback on this. And if someone wants to shoot us an email or a message, I'm here for it, because I've talked before about even my friend Phil, who's been on the podcast, in the way that he explained to me that he got this information from another activist. But this idea that you're not trying to change hearts and minds, you're trying to pull everybody over one notch. So if you have 5 levels, like level 1 is in level 5, or their position 1 and position 5 are complete opposite. And then, if you're a 1, 2 is your active allies, or passive I guess it would be like
you're planting a seed for the Holy Spirit to work on.
So 1 would be like your active allies, 2 would be your passive allies, 3 would be neutral, 4 would be your passive enemies, and 5 would be your active enemies. And if you're not trying to make your active enemies active allies, that's like that that would require moving people over too many notches. People don't go through ideological shifts like that in their life usually. So what you're trying to do is make your Your active enemy's passive, so they're less effective. Your passive enemy's neutral, so they're just there. And anyone who's neutral, you want to just pull at least to be passive. And anyone who's passive, you want to make them actively on your team. So, like, if you're looking at it from an activist perspective, which is what people on Twitter consider themselves often as activists, okay, you want to bring. I would imagine that would be the goal, right? How do I move this platform forward? You're not just like some dumb shit with some dumb take who just wants to complain, or even me, like whatever. How many followers do I have on Twitter? Not a lot. But then you're talking about people with 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, and it still feels like they're going for the hot takes. And then everyone in their camp, all their active allies are like, woo, and they like it and they retweet it. Their active enemies double down. Like we've created a double down culture. And it's not that you can't have your opinions. It's not that you're not entitled to them. It's not that you shouldn't have the right to express them on Twitter. I think I just want to point out again, going back to the intent. If your
that person's intent is no different than like a high school girl posting a selfie in the mirror being like, haha, I look like a mess today. Like it's just a reach out for, there is some insecurity and I would like some validation, please. And I'm not criticizing the high school girl any more than I am the person who's venting about some political issue on Twitter. Like it's just them going like, hey, remember me? Like, I'd like a hug. I'd like a high five, please. Like I would like something from you if you'd be willing to give it, and I will give it in return. But since we're not actually speaking in person, I just like you to like this tweet, please. Thank you. Like I'm on your team. Like the tweet.
Yeah. And I if you're just someone who wants to express, but when I think where I start to get lost is when you're someone who claims to be an activist, someone who's voiced their intent to change the way people see things, and your message is almost entirely geared towards people who are going to puff you up and say that's exactly right. And
it's so outlandish. Like it's so far over that you become like a talking point for the people who are trying to sell their view.
Yes.
Like this is what you're dealing with out there, this right here.
So this might be a bad time to bring it up and get into it, but I'm sure there might be some people who don't necessarily want to hear us talk about this, but I'm probably going to maybe even say her last name wrong. But some of these conversations that we're having started offline between us over a tweet that's made some traction from Joe Lumen, and her tweet was essentially like, I would rather, God, it might be easier to just pull it.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, you have it?
Actually, yeah. I
got
it. Okay, so she said, I would rather get an abortion than have a brown child who ends up being adopted by white evangelicals. It is not a kindness to children of the global majority to give them to people who will traumatize them with self and ancestral hatred. An abortion is an act of love.
Yeah. So
that's a hot take.
That's a hot take. It's been hot for her, for sure.
Now, she's received a lot of awful messages from people, direct messages. She's received, I think any threatening DMs that she gets are absolutely awful. I think those people should have their accounts suspended, even permanently. If you threaten somebody through a direct message, I don't give a shit about
what are you doing?
Like you should have
wrong with you that you're, I don't know. Yeah.
So that's fine. I think some of the responses publicly that she's gotten is like, wow, that have responded to anger. I think there's been, I think that some of the responses to those have been a little like, well, it's just my opinion, blah, blah. There's just a lot of, I get the communication around it gets weird, right? It's not a lot of characters. There's no, what do you mean about this or that? There's no diving deeper. Now I haven't listened to it, and I'm trying to come at this almost as neutral as possible, because I don't know her. I don't have a real problem with her. I don't think about her positions either way. This one just stuck out to me. She said a couple other things where I'm like, I don't know if that's necessarily the direction I'd take it, but whatever. But my point is that I'm not invested either way in this person's character or content. And I know that she did go on somebody's podcast who is a white Christian who has adopted black children, and they had a conversation about it. And she said something about how, hey, Like, thank you for, a lot of people just said some shit and threw some shade. Thanks for being curious and reaching out. And I think it's cool that he did that. I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable for people to have not been curious enough to want to have a conversation, because you're not coming at that as somebody who wants to have a conversation about that topic. You're coming at that from someone who might actively shut down a conversation about that topic, or maybe potentially be like maybe not have that teachable like candor, or like that I not she necessarily thinks that you can teach her something, but like I don't know, maybe not a generous spirit is the way I'll phrase it. She might not come at it that way. I don't know, because again, I don't know her, but my I think I wanted to bring this up because that's an inflammatory take, and I had feelings about it. On a personal level, I haven't adopted anybody, but I'm still white. That hasn't changed if anyone was wondering, but I was a white evangelical in my early to mid 20s when I first ended up. I didn't seek it out at all. It came up. It just happened. Really, I became a foster parent for a 9-10-year-old black kid, and throughout his life, he's now 19. I've been responsible for him and taking care of him, and I don't. Yeah, of course, some of my thinking around race was probably backwards at that point in my life. But I didn't ask for. I didn't go out of my way. I wasn't trying to fix this situation or do some sort of missionary thing. I just knew him and had invested in his life in a capacity that I knew how, to the point where when he was removed from his parents, he asked in court if he could come live with me. So look, there's obviously nuance to this. I know a handful of white people who have black children, and they were evangelical potentially at the time. And I don't know. I just am like that. A tweet like that says a lot. If you're an evangelical, you're going to hear that and be attacked on you'll feel uncomfortable on a couple of fronts, right? You're going to say, well, first of all, thanks for hating. I guess you think all evangelicals are trash and dangerous, and children are better off dead than with them. And I use the words children are better off dead because that's how they're going to perceive any conversation around abortion. So you're hitting it on all of the hot button issues that I just don't know if you would have to define. You have to know what her opinion on what makes or doesn't make an effective tweet. Like, I don't know what she would have found effective. I don't know what her intent was. I just don't think that whatever it is, it's going to shift anything, clarify anything, help anything. But she's entitled to that opinion, and she can absolutely say that all day long. What gets a little old is when people make those statements and then act like the rest of the world is unreasonable for responding emotionally to a statement that was made that's obviously going to solicit an emotional response. That must be what its intent was. But to hide behind, well, I was just sharing my opinion.
Yeah.
That can't be her full. That can't be her full opinion, because I'm sure I haven't heard anything from her before today. I don't know what she said when she was on the other podcast, but I'm sure if you talk to her, she probably is aware of white families that have adopted kids of color and are great parents and stuff. And she would probably say something along the lines of well, that's not the type of thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about the missionary adoption type thing, whatever. There's probably more nuance to it that she could probably get some common ground on with some people.
Yeah.
You could probably have a conversation of hey, you think it's weird that white middle-class youth groups always want to go to some brown country for a mission trip where they don't really accomplish anything? Instead of just spending $20,000 to send 8 kids down there, what if we just gave that money to some worthwhile cause in that country? If you actually care about those people, is that maybe a better use of the money? Why do you feel like this brown country needs your help? There's probably room for a nuanced conversation there that she's never going to get to have with a bunch of people based on something like this, because they're going to see that and instantly in their head, they're going to be like, well, you don't understand what you're talking about. That doesn't describe me. That's not me.
And here's what this part of the abortion conversation, just, man, it elevates my temperature quick, because I feel like this is the kind of thing that results from people trying to assemble talking points so that they can have an effective argument on Twitter and stuff like that. Like I think where some of this like anti-adoption talking points are coming from is to counteract the fact that like adoption is a counter argument to abortion for conservatives, right?
Mhm.
It's just give the baby up for adoption. I mean, I heard it this week. My truck, the Bluetooth is garbage on it. And so when it drops, it kicks me over to AM radio. And I don't know why, but I keep it on this Catholic station just because it's like, I can take crazy in like 30-second doses, you know? And I'm listening.
Radio's got to be a pretty cool area.
Oh yeah, they hand out a lot of bumper stickers. Everybody's seen those Catholic radio bumpers. Anyways, this guy, whoever was talking, was discussing abortion, and he made this statement that was like, it's said that there are 2 million couples across the U.S. that are looking to adopt, that are trying to adopt and would love a child, and yet this slaughter is happening on a daily basis, and that's a direct quote. And we've all heard that. I mean, if you grew up in this environment, you've heard that, right? And it makes me angry because I know so few people who have adopted in that community.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's so few people. That is the counter argument every time this thing comes up is like, just, well, give them up for adoption. Oh, well, you can always like let them be adopted. I mean, I'm sure there's some families out there. It's like, yeah, but not you, right? This is just an argument to you. Like you didn't adopt anybody. And yet, like, I have family members that have adopted. And adoption is a weird thing. It's a weird thing. There's definitely a lot of discussions to be had there about, like, cross-cultural adoptions, But there's a lot of reasons for families to adopt from overseas, right? There's a lot of reasons for it. And, like, I have family members who have adopted from part of Asia that is kind of known for, they have a pretty streamlined adoption process. I don't think it's like faulty, or from what I know about it, I mean, I don't think that it's like lax or anything like that, but it's a little easier to adopt from this area of the world. And that's part of the reason that these people adopted from there. And like when I see like these dismissive, these just dismissive dumb takes on this, like anybody who adopts from outside if you're a white couple and you adopt a non-white baby, like you're just collecting them like Lego figures or something.
Colonizing them,
It makes me so angry because 90% of it, you're just like the evangelicals making the counter argument. What have you done? How many kids have you adopted? Why don't you shut up?
Yeah,
and just let people live. You don't get to like, why do you want to speak for an entire group of people? And isn't it more important? Like there's arguments to be had there and questions about like, what is the proper way to help, how do you promote a kid from another country or another culture? How do you promote their cultural understanding and help them find pride in that and understand it and all of that stuff? Like there's a lot of shortcomings there, I'm sure, in these families, but to just dismiss adoption as a whole because it lets you just dismiss the conservative argument for it is dumb. And you become a conservative talking point when you say these things.
Yeah, that's what they'll use in their arguments to rally their base some more.
It turns into like, look, this is what we're dealing with on the other side. Like he can't even talk to these people. What argument is there to be had with these people when they think this way? And I mean, let's face it, when you look at like cable news, okay, we all know that certain topics are not tackled on cable news because of the monetary structure of that model, right? When your segments are sponsored by Halliburton and Northrop Grumman and Raytheon, you're going to have some soft takes on war and military conflict. Guaranteed, right? They pay the bills, they keep the lights on. And that same dynamic exists in social media. There's a reason to throw a hot take out there. It doesn't make it not true. It doesn't make it not what you think or you misrepresenting yourself. But like there's an incentive structure for stoking those fires and saying something that's going to rile people up, get them angry, get them excited. There's people who've made an entire career, like Milo Yiannopoulos has made an entire, I mean, maybe not recently, but up until he got like ostracized from society, that was like the whole model. Just say the most outlandish thing and you'll get traction and attention. And I think that's what irritates me about some of this discussion is like when that motivates what you say, and what you say then becomes attributed as like a part of the dogma and the ideology of this group of people, like that you represent this group of people.
Yeah.
Where does that line start and end between what you think and what you said and what, you know, what was why did you say it? Was it to get likes and retweets and all that stuff? You know, that's a personal matter that you have to sort out for yourself, but it's hard to ignore when you see things that are just like, you just look at it and you're like, does a real person actually think this? Like, is this something that a person actually believes?
Yeah. And it's weird. I think Twitter is a weird space because it's like, it's hard. Maybe there are people out there who have moved past this, but it's hard for me to think that anyone's really tweeting without hoping that it goes somewhat viral. Like, you want that. That's what it rewards. It's like basic behaviorism at its like finest, you know. It's just, I do it. If I say so, I'm like, oh, what can I say? Oh, that's funny. If I say that, will it get shared and will it get retweeted and liked a lot? Whatever. It's like, so I think that's also worth pointing out that I don't think anyone's, I think whatever criticisms there are, not to level the playing field, but I'm not saying that some of these thoughts of an outbursts or wanting to have these hot takes, like they're not something that anyone's really immune from. I think taking a second to think about like your motivations for it and why you're doing it might be a little helpful. I think something to tie into all this too, just to keep bringing in the, I don't know, examples that are nobody really wants to talk about, is, all right. So if there's this idea that if someone has a bad take on something, but it's someone that you liked, you will now be put into a box of people that co-signs onto that bad take. So if you like that person or like their product, now you like everything that they stand for, or you should be associated with it and you should be cut off.
And really, you want to like some songs. You're not into the whole like, pissing on kids things.
R. Kelly, right, guys? Come on. But like, I mean, R. Kelly is not necessarily a bad example because Remix to Ignition slaps. We can't pretend it doesn't. But what do we do with that? How about all the money for plays on Remix to Ignition go to help, I don't know, prevent R. Kelly from peeing on people ever again? Let's maybe start there, which we're in good shape because he's going in jail. But he might.
Seems like a probable and realistic solution.
He might be on people in jail. I could see it going in that direction. I hope he doesn't have a cellmate. That guy's never going to be. If I mean, let's to throw out examples that are.
Throw out some examples.
I have one.
Would be Chappelle or Dave Chappelle is probably like the biggest one right now, because if you like his comedy, now you're a turf, right? You can't, and people. I mean, the left is really wanting to cancel him pretty hard. They're like, and if you like him or support, I don't even know what it means to support, but if we've been watching Chappelle for quite a while, since Chappelle's show, and of course, there's been plenty of people that have had issues with him. I don't think evangelicals loved him back when he had the Chappelle show. But I think thinking about the way that things have played out in that scenario is worth a few minutes, because the pushback he got is what made him double down more. And I've brought this up a little bit, but just that double down.
Well, he's
living in a society. Like but
I don't think that counts the same for him as it does for someone else, because he's a comedian. He's used to dealing with hecklers or something. Like, if you come after him, that just gives him more material to do the thing that he does. So like, I don't disagree with you about the whole double down society, but I think in his case, it's a little different of like, he's just trying to stoke a conversation because he wins either way. Like, and not even in a bad way, you know, for him, it's not, he's doing it out of some malicious intent, but like, if he can get you talking and thinking about it, maybe that's true. He doesn't seem like he is. But it seems like that he just, whatever the angle is, he's going to be able to make something. It doesn't matter which way it goes. He can work with it.
so doubling down helps him no matter what. Like, so I think you're touching on something that's important, is like it trying to end that really stoked those flame. It didn't help. I'm not saying you can't have, again, I'm not saying you can't have your takes. I think I don't know when we move past, like, I don't like what you said. I think what you said is dangerous. Okay, let's flip this. Okay. I don't know if this is flipping it the way that I want to, really, but whatever. I'll just bring this up now too. Is we have this week where that pastor in Texas, of course, Texas, who is going on his like hate speech tirade, right? I'm not flipping this the way that I originally intended to, but he goes on this hate speech tirade about how gays should be executed by the state because of the Bible and stuff like that. I'm not sure exactly what church this is or how big it is, but it's now a national news story. Like, and who's making money off of it? Media channels are, because it's an outrage machine. Now they get to make money off of people being outraged over something that isn't going to change. That guy's not changing his ideology. He's going to double down. He's going to dig his heels in. He's going to keep telling his church the same old shit. And now the same people who wanted to, possibly some of the same people who wanted to defund the police at one point are now calling the cops on this guy to have him arrested. And because they don't like what he's saying, nobody likes what he's saying, except for the few people who are there. I don't know what it could lead to. I don't know what you can do about it. I don't know that turning him into a national news story is helping, because
he should have been left on his proverbial street corner just yelling about the end of the world, and like everyone could have moved on.
Like, what do you like? Why do we make everything that's awful a national news story? Like, what is it? Because I can only imagine most people think that that's awful here. I think in this country, most people would think that that's wrong. And the people who thought that are going to be like, yeah, wow, that's crazy, right, guys? I can't believe there's people out there like that saying that stuff. And then maybe people who wouldn't have thought too much about it are now, pulled that one tick to his side.
It's an easy person to dunk on. It's like, oh, great, another evangelical Christian with a really bad opinion on gay issues. Like, see, just like all the others. In the same way that, like, I don't want to get into too hot water here. There's plenty of evangelical leaders that like have only really made the news on a national level because it's just an easy target. It's like, yep, another hypocrite, another liar, another person who, espouses the words of Jesus and doesn't live by them. You're right. You got him. You got another. Like, most of the people in their congregation probably aren't thrilled about that either. Like, and some of them are maybe a little bit too thrilled and agree with it too much. You're right. Some of them are scumbags. Most of them are probably embarrassed that now this is a national story. Congratulations. You haven't accomplished anything.
Yeah. I guess I just don't know what the point. That's why I feel a little defeated. I feel really frustrated, is I don't really know what the end game is for a bunch of stuff. I don't know what the point is. Like, I don't think that, like, I feel like, again, this is one of those things where you talk about it and now you'll just be accused of thinking that you shouldn't take a stand against awful things. But I think you should redirect that energy towards something more maybe than just getting angry about an awful take from some backwoods church with some nobody, nothing fucking pastor who wouldn't have been a national figure had he just left there. Like,
so use your example instead of it just
change his mind. You're not going to change what he's saying. He's going to double down.
But he also doesn't represent the vast majority of people who you're going to target with a broad sweeping generalization, who are going to, there's a part of it like that drives people into these groups with lunatics. Like when you categorize people who are otherwise like pretty moderate, but they happen to share space with someone who's a lunatic, and you accuse them of being a lunatic like him, even though they might not be. Like people have a tendency to get defensive, and they do double down. And I'm trying to think of what a good example of that is, but like, I don't know. What do you do with that example? What's beneficial to do with that right there?
I have an opinion. Use Sam's example of the whole notches thing, pulling what the activist said, pulling someone one notch or the other, or one knot. It was a knot.
Notch, take whatever. I mean, just moving someone over
moving someone 1 degree. Like, The wrong answer, I think, is to come back on that and be like, look, another evangelical piece of shit, homophobe pastor. And if you're an evangelical, or if you agree with this dude, you're a piece of shit too. This guy ought to be arrested. Like, that's the wrong way, because that pushes people towards doubling down, not because they agree with that dude, but because you're attacking other things that aren't directly related. Versus you have an opportunity to be like, hey, regardless of how you feel about whether or not Jesus approved of homosexuality, like if you're going to come out from that angle of like, you can have those beliefs, but do you agree that wanting to execute people for being gay, Jesus probably wouldn't have been on board with? Like, do you agree that that's wrong? What this guy is saying about this specific thing, that's wrong. That's an opportunity to move people one tick in your direction. You're not asking them to not think that homosexuality is wrong. You're asking them to think that that dude's wrong with the hateful thing that he said. So that hopefully next time they hear somebody say something hateful, they're like, wait, hold on. I don't know about the whole gay thing, but that seems awfully hateful for no reason. I don't understand why you're being hateful.
Soften the stance, pull them farther away from the pole.
Right.
Make it feel like you're welcome over here with the rest of society.
Right.
You know, I know you're still sorting some things out, but the water's nice over here. Like,
right.
Come join. Do you really want to be in the, David Koresh's church over here with the lawn on fire, or do you want to be over here with the rest of normal, reasonable society?
Right. Like, we don't love that you feel this way about gay people, but we acknowledge and respect that you're not a crazy person like that guy. Like, if you're cool, we'll be cool, as long as you agree that he is not.
And I think this ties in. I do think this ties back a little bit to Chappelle. Is like, look, are you going to say if you're going to say all evangelicals are like that extreme version of it, or agree with that take, then you're obviously wrong. Like, that's not how most would feel. And you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're doing any sort of mission a disservice by painting with such a broad brush. And I don't think most people are doing that. I don't think most people are painting with that broad of a brush, but it doesn't mean that that's not going to make waves, those comparisons. And I think that in the same way where, like, Chappelle said a lot of fucked up things in his comedy over there. But he was also someone who is championed as someone, for what he said and how he's communicated through comedy, what it's like to be a black man in America. And he's dunked on white people for decades. And
in a way that's not pushed people away, but it's drawn them in.
Yeah, and he also has had a problem with the way that it drew people in at one point, which is why he disappeared. He was like, I don't think they're in on the joke the right way, and it made him angry. But I honestly feel like his comedy did a lot for me to like think about my reactions to things. Like, oh my God, he's making fun of me. And you can laugh at it, but you can also grow and change. And so he's been doing that for decades. Like, and now he comes out with some, originally whatever his jokes were that made waves. I honestly don't remember what they were. I've watched all of his specials. He put out a lot at one time. A lot of them blurred together. So I don't recall the specifics of the jokes. So I'm not going to even try to maybe dig into that. But I remember hearing them being like, oof, I don't know about that. Or
they weren't super clever. I think that's one legitimate thing a lot of people jumped on, or is like, he didn't have a super nuanced, clever, make you think about trans issues in a new light thing. It was kind of easy jokes for him.
Yeah.
And the fact that he came by in his last special and he explained more of his line of thinking and talked about his trans friend and everything, like, I think maybe that was a little bit too little too late, where it just felt like he was making excuses for like, yeah, I had some dumb jokes back in the day. Who didn't? This is how I actually feel about this. And I think to a lot of people, it's just like, yeah, but you said a lot of the dumb jokes. Like, it didn't really move the conversation forward, unlike his humor on so many other things does. And this felt like it was just a cheap, like, I can get a quick laugh here and go to the next thing.
Yeah, if that was his intent, it was a ham-fisted
attempt. Like, we know he's better at this than that. And it felt like, to a lot of people, he was just taking the cheap way out because it was an easy thing to make fun of, and then getting mad when people were like, that's a nasty thing to say for a cheap laugh. Like, you can say horrifying things if the joke is good enough. And that's always been true, no matter how much people complain about how like you can't make jokes anymore and blah, 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 blah. Bottom tier humor that's not clever has always been ragged on. People who make really clever jokes, almost doesn't matter how offensive it is. You can't make a joke that's too offensive if it's smart enough.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be I think that is the case in a lot of senses with comedy. Yeah, I feel like someone like Anthony Jeselnik is a good example of that, where like, I don't know if you guys have listened to his comedy. It's not for everybody, and some of it's tough to stomach.
It's pretty rough.
but I've never heard a punchline, even if I didn't laugh, even if I was offended. I've never heard a punchline and not been like, but God damn it, I did not see that coming. You never do. He's very witty, super clever at crafting jokes. And I've been offended by some of those jokes, and I've never just been like, well, I guess I don't believe in his comedy anymore, and I don't think anyone should have to be able to watch it. And I think if it offends you, that this comedy shouldn't exist. And I think I think one of the things Chappelle did that was stupid was I think he diverged from comedy in some ways and was like, said dumb shit like gender is a fact. It's like, no, that sentence doesn't even make sense. Gender is a societal construct. So I don't know what you want to do with that, Chappelle, but the language around it's framed completely wrong. But I think now it's what's frustrating is like, you can't respect his comedy. You can't still enjoy it without being considered a TERF or part of the problem, or that people like that need to go.
Well, says who? Only if you want to talk about it on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well, look, here's a good example of this too, that not as many people will be as invested, because I think what part of this thing is like, this is only a struggle if you're invested in and value the person or the opinion or whatever or the viewpoint that you're talking about that's in question. Because look, the fact of the matter is like, I hate the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I'm probably always going to hate them. And if what's his nuts from the Red Hot Chili Peppers,
Anthony Kiedis,
sure, whatever,
lead singer,
Flea.
Yeah, if all of them from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, if horrible news came out about them tomorrow, there was no chance I was going to spend a lot of time with the Red Hot Chili. I can swear them off. It doesn't cost me anything, and in fact, I'm like, well, I don't even have to consider it anymore when people bring it up.
Yeah,
but when it's somebody that you're more invested in, it's not as easy as a decision. And I had this happen like very recently. Like I've talked on the podcast quite a bit about how like I get very tied up with a person and their ideas and stuff like that. And podcasting is usually the form it takes. And, I go through like spurts where I'm just kind of absorbing as much material from a person that I've discovered as I can. One of the more recent ones is Daryl Cooper, who does the Martyr Made podcast.
Yeah.
And the guy's he's a brilliant guy. He really is. And like, I've shared a bunch of his stuff. I've shared it with people on the Discord, and some other people have listened to it. Sam's listened to a bunch of it. Then I kind of went looking for, the other one that I've mentioned quite a bit that I really love is Dan Carlin. And, he's got a great podcast. Hardcore History is a great podcast, but I really like his Common Sense podcast too, which is a more political, ideological discussions. I went looking I thought, man, these two have mutual contacts. They cover a lot of the same types of material. There has to be some intersection here between Daryl Cooper and Dan Carlin, right? Maybe they've done a project together. So I go looking for it. Well, it turns out they did have an interaction, and it was a very negative one on Twitter.
Oh, interesting.
So in the course of like reading about this, one of the things I find is like, there's a Reddit group about Martyr Made, and a lot of people in the Martyr Made Reddit group were talking about how much they hated Daryl Cooper now because they found his Twitter. And so I'm like, oh, great. So I go look at his Twitter, and there's a lot of stuff on there that I don't agree with at all. And some of that has come out in the podcast and stuff like that. But, he and Dan Carlin got in this heated interaction on Twitter during the Black Lives Matter protests. Daryl saw them as violent riots and that they should have called in the National Guard and stopped them and stuff. And Dan Carlin is like very committed to the, protesting is a right, and that's like, quintessential American value is the right to protest, and you have to leave these in. Well, the organizers of the protest should be prosecuted if it turns violent. Dan's like, well, look, no organizer of any protest can control what happens once there's hundreds of thousands of people there. And they just went back and forth, and Dan Carlin called him a fascist. it was a mess. If you didn't know anything if you hadn't listened to any of the Martyr Made stuff, it would be really easy to look at that and be like, this guy is an idiot and he has some really terrible ideas, and just write him off. But I've listened to a lot of his stuff. And in fact, like before I found this, I just finished this very long series that he did on Jim Jones. And it's about Jim Jones and the People's Temple, but it runs simultaneously alongside a history of the civil rights movement. And it's great. I mean, it's fantastic. And like, I don't think you could listen to that explanation of the civil rights movement, the way he talked about Malcolm X and, the African Liberation Army and some of the other, his take on like some of the like white activists and the way that they co-opted the movement and used it for their own good, and how that ended for both, like, all of the leaders of the blacks on the black side of the civil rights movement end up either imprisoned or dead under mysterious or not mysterious circumstances, while the white leaders end up, professors at Princeton and stuff like that, and celebrated and going to the Met Gala and crap like that. Like, I don't think you could listen to this and come away thinking like Daryl Cooper is a white supremacist. That's just all there is to it. But regardless, I don't like what I saw on his Twitter, and I don't agree with it. What do you do with somebody when you find that paradigm? Because Dave Chappelle's a great example. Like, I think a lot of his takes on the LGBTQ community were just, I don't know, rudimentary, predictable, not very nuanced, not very funny. I mean, there was just a lot there that you're like, why did you decide to take this shot?
They're the takes of a guy who's been unplugged from the world for a long time and has been rich and kind of in the rich people bubble for a long time. And like, I think he's just not as plugged into that as he thinks he is.
But for that being said, as much of a problem as that is, for a lot of people, which a lot of the people that I saw screaming about Dave Chappelle during the height of the uproar, a lot of them were white. Considering like how much Dave Chappelle has done for Black Americans and just in general, just like awareness about issues affecting Black people, and the way that his comedy and his activism and stuff has changed people's viewpoints, for a bunch of white people to come along and say like, nope, you're done, we need to get your special taken down, we need this, we need that, to like try to shut him out and call it quits for him. I don't think you should, like, I really don't think it's your place to do that. I get where you're coming from, and I know that like that hurts if you're like close to those people and you feel that it hurts them. That's not the summation of this guy who has this long career and history of activism. Like, and for you to say like, that's it, he should be gone, or his material should be taken down. It kind of rings of white privilege. I mean, that's white privilege, isn't it? I mean, for you to say you're done talking because I don't like what you say about something.
Yeah, I think what's different or tough to parse out, and I think that's what we're, I guess, trying to do here, is it would be like because he's joking on because he's joking on a group of people who are marginalized and at risk of violence from others, high risk of suicide. Like, and a lot of that's based on society. So this is what I think it's really difficult to parse out. Is I don't know how. This is what's tough about comedy, right? It's become pretty mainstream, and I think people who don't really like comedy end up watching comedy, and they shouldn't. Like, it's like they're because there's this like, oh, comedians are the philosophers of today. I think some of them break out with some fantastic takes, but some of them just make dick jokes. Some of them talk about their old sex partners, some of them aren't really coming out with these hot philosophical takes through comedy that's it's like we're there to laugh, we're there to have the worst parts of ourselves maybe exposed and pointed out and laugh at, and there's like this mutual agreement when you're in that scenario and in that setting that you'll kind of just set that shit aside and laugh at and laugh. And if you don't and you didn't like it, you can not like that part and you can like this part, and things can be more than just one thing. And I think that's what's tough, but I'm not saying it doesn't complicate it when you start talking about people and then seemingly targeting them going forward who are marginalized, who are at risk, who like, so it's not necessarily just like making fun of, like, how many times did we watch Christians get mad when like comics made fun of Christians or South Park made fun of Christians or whatever, like Christians
right,
but they're not really a marginalized group in society and they're not at risk, and those jokes and those behaviors are not really going to have real negative ramifications outside of being personally offended. I can't guarantee, I don't think they do. And this is a conversation, you can have the same conversation about Joe Rogan, I guess. I don't know
very much so.
I don't know if you can guarantee that he's not solidifying in some people's minds that, because talking about comedians as the philosophers of our day is really giving the listeners a lot more credit than it deserves. I think, sure, there are comedians who might have some great takes, real funny perspectives, and that really make you think about who you are and the kind of person you want to be. And all through a great comedic take. There's a lot of fucking idiots who like dumb jokes that like just want to laugh. They're not smart people. They're not there to be philosophized to. You're giving the listeners so much credit. So I don't think defending comedians because and for that reason is good. So that's not what you were doing. I'm not saying that. I'm just wanting to point out that take. So I do think that you can't say that what Chappelle has said, and I would argue that what he originally said probably would have, I'll argue it. Someone tell me I'm wrong if they want. That what he originally said could have fizzled out and objectively caused little to no harm. I don't know that the direction he's taken it hasn't solidified in some people's minds that an ideology that could ultimately harm trans people.
Well, I think that was a lot of the valid criticism that people...
I do want to finish this point because I do also think Chappelle knows that his jokes also solidify racism in some stupid people's minds too. And he's taken that and said, this joke's worth that risk for me. So I think you can look at it that way too. And I don't know what you want to do with that. I just think that I'm trying to look at it in a nuanced fashion.
I think I went in a different direction than I originally thought of. Look, Chappelle's stuff's not going to get taken down off of Netflix or anything else. And like, that really wasn't my intention to like say, oh, leave poor Chappelle alone. It's more about like a lot of people identify with a lot of the other things that he's saying. And so to make him, a pariah.
Yeah.
That, a person identifying with him doesn't really have a place over here with you, the right people.
Yeah,
I think that's where that problem is. It's not so much about the person, the star that's saying those things. It's more about like, man, a lot of people value what he says on a lot of other topics, and to toss him out of polite society, as a concept, it alienates people who feel that way. And like, I've felt that a lot over the years towards a few different people, where it's like, you don't even agree necessarily with like what the person is saying at all, but like the vitriol and stuff with what people are coming at him and the people who support him and like him and stuff like that, it makes you feel like you're outside the loop, that circle. And I think it ultimately is harmful to the idea that you're trying to promote.
Yeah. Jeremiah, what were you going to say?
I think with Chappelle, I've got two examples, and he's one of them. I think you're right. If he had just done the first special, he made a couple corny trans jokes that weren't really that nuanced. And if people had, there was some mild pushback then. And if he had just in his very next special done part of the bit he did in his last one to be like, hey, I realize I hurt some people. I'm sorry. I'm not going to make any more jokes about trans people. let me tell you about this friend of mine. Here's why I made some of these jokes. It's not because I think poorly of you. It's actually because I want to include you in the same way I included gay people back in the day by making fun of them, blah, blah, blah. If he had just done that, everyone probably would have moved on. But he made more jokes in the next special. And then when it irritated people, he doubled down. And by the end, what people were saying was not so much of like Chappelle is a hateful bigot, but Chappelle keeps feeding the hateful bigots and doesn't seem to understand or care that his words are doing that. And that's the problem. In the same way that like J.K. Rowling could have just been a billionaire.
Oh my God.
Living on Billionaire Island with all of her money, and everyone would have loved her for the rest of her life because she gave Harry Potter to the world, a series that has done a lot for a lot of different people and done a lot of great things. So the first time she put out a tweet that seemed kind of transphobic, and then she's followed it up with some statements about like, no, look, I've got concerns about this specific thing. It doesn't mean I treat people bad. I love people, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember exactly what she said, but like she put out some statements to the effect of like, you guys have got it all wrong. I'm allowed to have an opinion about this thing that doesn't perfectly agree with you. And it doesn't mean I'm a hateful person. But she just keeps coming back to that well over and over and over again, to where people eventually flip to like, I think this is hate for you. Why is this the hill that you want to die on? Why do you keep making this a thing? Is it because you just want the attention because you're not getting talked about enough? Is it because you're rich and you're bored and you're just looking for hills to die on? Like, whatever the reason is, you just keep coming back to this, and it doesn't feel like you love us and you've got some issues. This is starting to feel like you just hate us. Or like you just want to rip into us. And I think that's fair at a certain point for people to be like, it doesn't feel like your heart is in the right place, no matter what you're saying. Even if you're just asking questions or whatever, like it feels, I think people's gut isn't necessarily wrong about that, of like, she's done it to herself. And in some ways, Chappelle's done it to himself too. What's the actress, Gina Carano, who got fired from The Mandalorian for making her, conservatives are treated like Jews in the Holocaust, and people were mad at the time of like, she's been canceled because of her opinion, blah blah blah, she's been fired because of her opinion. It's like, no, she shared stuff like that before, and Disney, the most brand conscious company in the world, said, you are one of our employees, don't do that on social media. Like, we don't want you to share that opinion as long as you're employed of the mouse. And she was like, okay. And then 2 weeks later, she did it again. And like, she kept poking the bear, and then eventually they fired her. And like, that's really the reason she got fired, is because of like Disney's brand conscious social media policies, and because they didn't want her poking the bear. Like, regardless of what they think about anything that she was saying, that was totally irrelevant. Like, and so you can't help but feel a little bit bad for her, of like, does she actually think that conservatives are treated like worse than Jews in the Holocaust? Probably not. She doesn't seem like she lives under that much of a rock. However, she kept coming back to that well of being like, here's my hot take. Here's my spicy meme. Here's all my spicy anti-COVID restrictions memes. And eventually they bit her enough that like, you kind of deserved some of that. That doesn't mean you're a horrible person, but like
you're choosing to compromise your
you're trying to turn yourself into a martyr for the dumbest reason. Like, this is a super dumb meme hill to die on, but you and so many others have decided to. The difference is you're not like a 35-year-old mom posting dumb stuff on Facebook when you're bored, when your kids are at school during the day. Like, you're a famous actress working for one of the most brand conscious companies on the planet. That's the difference.
Well, and that exact sort of situation played out on the other side of the fence this week with this reporter, Felicia Sonmez.
Yeah.
She works for the Washington Post, and it was a very similar sort of thing in a way, because there was another reporter for the Washington Post that retweeted this, like, it was a dumb sexist joke that it was a boomer joke about women. It's not even worth repeating, but it was dumb. And, I can understand for sure that it would ruffle feathers with a lot of people. I mean, I saw it and I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's just like when somebody elbows you and makes a comment about someone and you're like, yeah, what year do you think this is? But, when you have a problem with a coworker, in almost any situation, especially if you're a high ranking person within a company, there's a channel for that. It's called human resources. And you go through human resources if you feel like you need to involve the company hierarchy in this deal, you could always go directly to the person. So she screenshots this post and retweets it, right? And instantly, big uproar and stuff like that. The guy apologized. She
retweets it with a comment of like, making a point about, I can't believe we work for a company that allows for someone to say something like this. Like,
there was no point at which, like, the way that I understand it is like that was the first move. It wasn't like I went to the Washington Post and said, "Hey, I'm offended by this. Can you talk to him about this? Can he take it down?" The first move was to be like, the Washington Post is a place where this is allowed.
Yep.
So the guy apologizes. He's a guy that came to her defense when she made comments about Kobe Bryant being accused of rape and stuff like that right after his death. Not the most tasteful thing in the world. And this guy had come to her defense and stuff. So there was some history there that wasn't just like contentious. After big tweet storms and stuff like that, and the guy apologized and all that stuff, the Washington Post suspended him for 30 days, which seemed like a strange move considering like how far the situation had advanced. They sent out some sort of memo saying like, hey, if you have a problem with a coworker, channel it through HR, please, blah, blah, blah. And then she screenshots this email and posts it on Twitter and like, this is what happens when you speak your mind. And like just continually did this until at some point the Washington Post is like, after capitulating a number of times when they probably should have said, hey, this is our policy, like you really shouldn't do this. They fired her. And like from what I've seen from her, it's been I stood up for myself and I stood up for women, and then I was fired from my job. It's like, you were fired because you burned down the company that you worked for. We're giving them no chance to react to the thing that you're upset about.
They didn't meet your perfect standard it retroactively, and you went right to war. Like you opened with, I'm going to nuke you. And you didn't really give them a whole lot of options at that point.
Yeah, and then you nuked them like 3 times. That's what happened. If I had a problem with one of my coworkers, especially one that was high up the chain, and I just dished it out on Facebook where all of our contemporaries and stuff like that are, all of our customers are and stuff, there would be ramifications. That's working at a company, and like you choose to make those moves. I just think like what's the takeaway here? I think that's what everybody's always wondering, because I feel like it's like most things. There's not really a concrete course of action that you can call for in this regard. It's just
delete your social media. I think is the only like concrete course of action that has any chance of improving the situation. Is get rid of it.
Right.
Like, I feel like the takeaway, I don't think it's clear cut, but I do think, we've talked, we don't need to go on a whole lot longer about all this, but you and I have talked a lot about free speech, where you draw the line, how you draw the line. And it feels like in a lot of the ways, the things that we've even talked about tonight don't necessarily, like in our country, the way it works right now, they don't violate like free speech. It's not like you're yelling fire in a building. You're not.
Let's be clear. Sam thinks you should be able to scream that Sandy Hook was fake.
Yeah, I do. And I'll die on that hill. I'm going to tweet about it later.
And that's where we disagree.
Yeah. It's the root cause.
He's willing to die on the same hill as so many crisis actors of years past.
Oh my God.
You all read.
So it's not, I think it's just tough. I think what's frustrating, we live in this has come up so many times, shedding that evangelical world is like, what we got tired of is like clear cut answers where everyone just spoon feeds you the way it works. And you just have to go, okay, and fucking get fat on it or choke to death. But Like, it's just, you get sick of that, and you're like, I don't want to be spoon fed this information anymore. I don't trust that this like gets all wrapped up with a neat and tidy, perfect little bow on it. And I'm not chasing that on the other side either. And I think that's what people want from all this shit. And it doesn't make the desire for that is not wrong. The desire for it's totally normal. I think we're always chasing and looking for ways to make sense of the world. And when things are too much of an anomaly, the easiest thing to do is to cut that out and make it so that thing can't exist anymore.
Make
And
it black and white.
yeah, and you
So you can have
try
a
to
black
get
and
it
white
off your
opinion.
radar. And I understand that. I think to me the takeaway is like I have probably leveled out a little bit on despite the dangers that can come from allowing people to have a platform to say something. Never mind the fact that all these platforms are owned by companies that can do whatever they want. Like, let's be real. You're not garnering a crowd at the Capitol with a bullhorn and getting a bunch of people to listen to you because they really like your takes. You take away people's social media presence and they're just useless fucks like the rest of us. And that's fine. So I think you have to add that into the mix too, that these are private companies that can do whatever they want. And then what? So what? Now we have to have a conversation about capitalism and how capitalism works and how dangerous unfettered capital, like all this shit is so connected that you can't just solve it. And you have to accept that there's going to be things in this world that you don't like. And I know that the general response to three white men saying this stuff, and you have to address that, even though it's obvious and we have before, like the response is, well, we're not at a disadvantage. We're not going to be harmed by any of this language. Things are going to ultimately work out pretty well for us. And to that, I say, that's why you all should have been born white men too. I don't know what you want me to do about that.
That's
don't,
your mistake.
Don't worry. Statistically, the odds are really high. One of us will die of a fentanyl overdose or suicide like a good Midwestern white man does. But until then, you're going to have to put up with us trying to fix the world's problems through a podcast. That's just, those are the rules.
No, but I do think that it does. It's like, I understand that we aren't objectively going to be hurt by a lot of the things that happen that we get to talk about.
Most people aren't either if they get off social media. And I'm not trying to be like, let me fix all of your problems here. Like there's actual harm that comes by as a result of that, some of that stuff. But like you do get to choose to a large degree how much you participate in it. It doesn't mean those hateful people don't exist, but they always existed. The hateful people were always there somewhere. You can choose to contribute some extra light to them if you think you can make a positive difference. But if you are able to be honest enough with yourself to know that what you're getting out of this is a cathartic, like, I want to win one for the team, I want to get a dunk, I want to make a point, I want to do whatever, it's probably healthier for you just not to participate. And it doesn't mean you have to choose the healthy option, but like, if you're trying to go for what's the healthy option here, what's going to make me less depressed about the state of the world, not participating in that part of it is okay. Social media isn't real. Like it's a cosplay land where people LARP the witty version of themselves or whatever. Like, and I'm not talking about just like sharing pictures of your vacation and what the thing you cooked with your family. Like there's that side of social media, but talking about like the Twitter side of things, like you don't have to be there. No one has to be there.
What's really sad is when you find, like, I was looking around on Twitter today, and when you find someone who's trying to be that like ideological pundit, getting attention with their hot takes and stuff like that, and it's just not really happening for them. They're not garnering the attention that they hope they would, and a lot of it is because they don't have a very clear or witty take on a lot of things. It's just sad. It's sad to look at, and just, I don't know, it comes across as like pathetic when you're obviously angling for attention by saying the most inflammatory thing you can, but it's not funny or witty enough for anybody to care that you're saying it. I don't know.
That's how I feel about Elon Musk a lot of the time. It's you're involved in like these 5 different companies. You have, I think, very selfish reasons for wanting to save the world. Like you want credit for saving the world, but whatever. Like you're working on some better ideas than some oil companies. So sure, I'll support you for that. But like, why do you feel like spending an hour on Twitter a day having dumb takes with people? Like you could spend all of your time laying on like a couch being carried around by servants being like spoon-fed grapes, and you have enough money to pay all those people like 6 figures to do that and never miss the money, like you'll take care of these people. You're going to be nice to the people popping grapes in your mouth, but like you could be doing that all day every day, being carried around. Like, why do you even use a cell phone? Like you've reached the level of wealth and power where you don't even have to touch phones. Other people can do all of that for you. Like, you can be ferried around on a cloud of opulence for the rest of your life while you're trying to save the world. Why are you arguing with people on Twitter?
It's not what he wants.
Right. If I had
He wants to
$200
be a
billion,
public figure.
you would never hear from me again.
There's a lot of those. You would be a Russian oligarch.
Exactly. Well, I don't feel like I want to sign up for them, but I've said this before. I don't remember if I've said it to you guys, but about certain former evangelical leaders who refuse to leave the public spotlight. I would like to think that if I had such a big fall from grace and was so fabulously wealthy, I would have the wherewithal to be like, you know what? I lost that one. However, I can win by buying a giant cabin in the middle of the mountains in my own 5,000-acre preserve, and you will never hear from me again, and I'm going to have the best life over here by myself. I would like to think I would have the wherewithal to be like, you know what you shouldn't do? Get back on Twitter. Like, that's probably not the move.
It's like Jerry Falwell Jr. It's like
what?
trying to be.
Wasn't thinking about him at all. Just definitely a different person.
Well, you weren't. I certainly was.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I don't even know who it is.
I know you don't think about him at all, so that's important. But no one cares what you think. You're not a statesman. You're not well spoken. You're not a good public speaker. You're not good at any of this. You just had the steering wheel at the biggest evangelical educational institution in the country for a while. That was the only reason you were prominent. Now that you're not at the helm of that machine anymore, no one cares. You don't have the kind of money to buy yourself importance. Like, you need to just go open a chain of Subways and shut up and disappear and enjoy your upper middle class lifestyle. Like, get out of here.
Let's all do a couple of quick final takes on this, because if you have one, because I have one more that I want to get out before we leave. So a lot of this podcast is because we've all been wrong about a lot of things our entire life, and we've made those shifts. We've made plenty of them despite their discomfort, and those were always done, and they always happened slowly and because of conversations and relationships with people who loved us, even though we had bad takes.
A seed got planted, and then it needed a little while.
Now, just for example, like, I know right now, I obviously have to be wrong about something. That's why I try not to be too dogmatic. I try to hold my opinions in an open hand rather than a closed fist. And I try to not just err on the side of empathy on most things. But I'm sure I'm wrong about something, and it's hard to know what, because you wouldn't believe what you do if you didn't think you were right. So
I think you're wrong about Sandy Hook.
So you take things like this or any other platform where you listen to it because you like their perspective, or you like the people regardless of maybe some of their bad perspectives, and you as a listener participate in elevating that voice, whether it's a comic or an actor or a newscaster or just any sort of public figure. Like, it's individuals who elevate them, and they do that with people whose takes they appreciate. But then if that person says something they don't like, you want to take it all back. We want heroes, we want spokespeople that are complete kind of copies of ourselves in a lot of ways. So when they have those takes that you like, you're like, we need to elevate this because this person's articulate and can say what I'm thinking and what I think is best. And then when they diverge on a topic, or maybe it's like, shit, we need to get this person out of here quickly. And that's just not that. We live in a world where it can't work like that. And we're so interconnected and interlocked now that we've built up all these walls. As Jeremiah, you pointed out at the beginning, like, our echo chambers kind of like build themselves up to become their own things, and they're separate, and you're rewarded for clashing, but not necessarily having a good public discourse. I don't know. I think what's concerning about where we're at, in light of everything we've talked about, is that there isn't a good form of public discourse about complicated things, or things that aren't complicated that you really believe someone's emphatically wrong about, and that you believe their views and ideas cause objective harm to people. There's still, I don't know that we can create a better, I don't know that we can create a better world without finding a way to have conversations in a space where you can not, I don't know, where you
Well, I
can do
think
that.
the answer is
Like, that's the only move. That's the only move forward, right? Like, what else can you do? You either like keep these partitions, and everyone doubles down and grows their base and grafts people in who find them, who ideologically is going to align with those, or you find a way to say, like, maybe we shouldn't just allow these people to just like fall into these stupid fucking groups that do nothing for them, and we should create a way and have a space where we can have these discussions, and we can encounter people who might change our minds, or at least allow us to see a part of their soul that's worth loving in any way.
If you can be honest enough with yourself when you're tempted to participate in one of these debates, you just have to, or one of these conversations on social media, you want to get involved at all, just ask yourself, are you trying to make the ditch or the trench 1 foot deeper? Or are you trying to make the bridge 1 foot wider? Like, what side of this are you hoping to hop in on? And if you're not able, if you don't know the answer to that, that's okay. Like, if you're having an emotional response to something because you saw somebody's spicy tweet about adoption for Christian families, and you just have a bunch of jumbled ideas in your head and you know that it's mostly emotional, probably the right answer is don't participate right now. Write the tweet, save it in your drafts, give yourself the pat on the head for the dunk, come back tomorrow, think about it, decide if you need to participate. But like, you have the option of being the person that either scored points, temporary worthless internet points for your team, whatever that is, or it's possible you could be the person that someone private messages like 2 years later to be like, hey, you said something and it got me thinking about something in a different way, and like, I feel 10% different about this thing now. Thanks. Like, you're the person who got me to see this issue in a slightly different light because you disagreed with what I thought, but you made sense and you seemed reasonable, and I think a little bit differently now.
Yeah,
I think that's a good way of putting it. And
Twitter might
you know
be
what?
too far gone. Also,
Yeah,
we
I think
can
it
leave
is.
it. We can
Yeah.
talk about how Twitter might just be too far gone of a space where you're like, if you're there, you know why you're there. You're expecting, you want to dunk on people, you want to get retweeted. Twitter might just not. You might have your personality on Twitter, and then maybe you'll be a little bit different in real life too. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think my big thing that I think you got to keep in mind is just like, make allies, not enemies. Like, in all of these arenas, you don't win by making more enemies. Like, you win by making allies. And I'm worried that we're going to find that out in a big way in the next election and the next 2 elections.
Yeah.
I think there's like, it's really tempting to let yourself think about, like, especially when it comes to politics, it's really tempting, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, that like, you're going to vanquish the other side. And you're just, I hear a lot from people on the left that are like, we're basically just waiting for these people to die. Like, all these ideas go away when these old people die. And that's just not the
Yeah,
case.
proving
Their
to not be
ranks are
true.
swelling. I mean, through whatever events are happening, their ranks are swelling, and it's not all just angry white people. Like, their ranks are swelling in the, among Latinos and other nationalities and minorities and stuff like that. So this all out war, no holds barred approach to like shouting down the other side is just not going to get you where you want to go. And if I have to admit to the one thing that I was wrong about, I did buy a copy of Going Rogue by Sarah Palin at one point. I didn't read it though. I mean, I don't read books.
Yeah. But just to add a caveat to what you're saying, none of that ever means though that you like call out hate where there's hate. Sometimes you do have to have a line in the sand on some stuff. And I think there are certain elements of a certain political party that are focused on like, we're going to be the stone wall that everybody else breaks upon, and we will call you demon baby killer groomers if you come anywhere near us. Like, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot about those people, but they're not the majority of the voting bloc. They're the solid base that's never going anywhere, and you can't do anything about them. And like you said, they're unfortunately not getting smaller in the way that you would hope they would, but they're still not the whole voting group. They're just the base, in the same way that there's a base on the other side. Like the contest is not for the base. It's for all of the people that maybe you disagree with a lot of their values, but you guys can both agree in some of the disgusting ways the government should and shouldn't be done. And you can find a lot of common ground there. You're not going to find common ground with the crazy people.
Yep.
Ever.
Yeah. And that's definitely, I think that's maybe a good place to end it. Like,
let's call this mess to a close.
Yeah.
We solved it, guys. We did it.
Finding just
we did
that.
It.
Yeah, because I don't know. God, we don't need to. I want to say more.
Yeah, Sam, no more qualifications. Just have your hot take. Just stick to it. We solved it.
It's not.
We solved
I'm not
it. It's
for hot
fine.
takes. I'm not looking to qualify anything. I just think I like the way you sum that up. Because there are things that are worth talking about. I think there's just better channels and ways to do it. And I think there's ways you can do it that actually are counter effective to your means. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at.
This Daryl guy and Dan Carlin should have had that conversation over a beer and a joint after they did a joint podcast together, and they could have argued about it, right? Like that's where that conversation should have happened.
That podcast. That would have been great.
Yeah.
And as always, Jeremiah and I's stated mission is to eventually have Sam buy a gun.
It's so messed up because they keep buying me AR-15s and sending them to my house.
Yeah, I keep as soon as I get the serial number filed off, I just pop it in the mail, send it to Sam. It's totally legal. If it's not legal, Sam doesn't know the difference because he doesn't know anything about guns.
Yeah, I don't even know what to do. I get it, and I'm like, well, I don't want this, so I just go drop it off at.
I send him the YouTube instructions. Like, so easy. So easy, his foster kids can figure out how to assemble that gun themselves. And you know what?
Exactly.
That's the future the liberals want.
Jeremiah's actually taken to using that excuse with crappy cars too. He keeps telling his wife, like, I'm holding this for Sam until he comes around.
Eventually, Sam's going to want to get 8 miles per gallon because it makes this noise every time you push the right pedal. He's going to like it. You can watch birds fall dead from the sky when I drive it, but man, it just makes you feel something.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you agree, if you disagree, if you hate this, if you want to yell at us, the best place to do this is on Discord, and you can find the links in our social media accounts. It's a fun place to hang out. There's a lot of really cool people there that are regulars now. I feel like we've just got a good group nowadays, and it's a conversation you want to be in on. So,
and when we post about this on Instagram, I'll probably throw everything I said out the window and respond to all of your comments snarkily and be very dismissive of them, possibly, but I'll try not to.
Hey, social media. You're in the toilet. You're going to wrangle a turd. And with that, we will see you next time.